Why then is God never mentioned? Well, here's the biggest surprise I've got for you. He is. 5 times. And people say to me, Esther is a book in which God isn't mentioned. I say, yes, he is. 5 times he's mentioned. And I want to show you where. He is mentioned in the form of acrostics, the initial letters of either his name or his title. Sometimes it's forward, sometimes it's backwards. And that's not a coincidence either. I've tried to put it into English for you so that you can see it, but bear in mind it's in the Hebrew. Now, sometimes it's the last letters of a series of words that make another word, but usually it's the first letters. Now, the Jews, who loved playing with words, were very fond of acrostics. You'll find them all the way through the Psalms, especially in that very long one, 119. And the description of the ideal wife in Proverbs chapter 31 is another acrostic. In the book of Lamentations, 4 out of 5 chapters are an alphabetic acrostic, each line beginning with the next letter of the alphabet. It's a very skilled literary device, and it can be used to convey coded or secret messages. Now, in the book of Esther, there are 5 acrostics, and the first 4 follow a remarkable pattern. Chapter 1, verse 20, chapter 5, verse 4, and then verse 13, and chapter 7, verse 7. Now, the first 2 use the first letters of 4 consecutive words, whereas the second pair use the last letters. Then there's another interesting point. The first acrostic is backwards, the second is forwards, the third is backwards, and the fourth is forwards. Now, of course, you must realize that these acrostics are actually in the Hebrew text, and therefore in the Hebrew language. And the 4 letters are actually JHVH, the 4 letters of God's name. That's pronounced Jehovah in English and Yahweh in Hebrew. Now, to help you to understand how it works, we've got here an English equivalent version in which we're using the word Lord, L-O-R-D, as a substitute for JHVH, for Jehovah or Yahweh. And the translation has had to be twisted a bit to show you how it works. Let's take the first, chapter 1, verse 20. Due respect our ladies shall give to their husbands, both great and small. Due respect our ladies, D-R-O-L. That's the word Lord backwards in the initial letters of the first 4 words. Now in the next, chapter 5, verse 4, it's forwards. Let our royal dinner, L-O-R-D. Now, why is it sometimes backwards and sometimes forwards? Well, when it's backwards, the words are being spoken by a Gentile. But when it's forwards, it's a Jew speaking. It's as if the Jews are saying the Gentiles can never say the word right. Or it may be that they don't want to put the sacred name on Gentile lips. Now, those are the first 4, but there's possibly one more in Esther which stands on its own. The letters are slightly different, and that spells I am, only it's backwards again. Now, that's 5 acrostics in the book of Esther, and there are no others. Now, all this is much too much of a coincidence. The writer has carefully worked it all out and then worked it into the text. It's so subtle that no Gentile would notice it. And it does, there are various explanations, but the one that fits best to my thinking is very simple. And that is that it was written in a time when it was dangerous to mention the Jewish God. And therefore presumably written a bit later than the events. You see, at first, people would pass the story of Esther on verbally, orally, and it would be remembered as a folk tale. But there'd come a time when somebody says, you know, we ought to get this written down, because people will celebrate this annually and they will need to hear the true story of what lies behind this feast, or they might forget it. So let's get it written down. But presumably by that time, anti-Semitism was rearing its head again. And people said, if you're caught with a document about the Jewish God here, you'll be in trouble. How can you write the story of Esther without mentioning God? Well, this is a typical Jewish answer to the problem. It really is. That is just how a Jew would think. We'll get his name in, but we'll do it in such a way that people don't realize. And in fact, God is all the way through. Isn't that interesting? Well, there's something you didn't know.